Hey folks, Gway. So recently, I've gotten a bunch of emails and comments about a pastor who, he goes off in his Sunday church service last week. The guy's name is Lauren Livingston. He's at the Central Church of God in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he decided last Sunday was the Sunday to talk about politics. In particular, talk about how politics is not welcomed in his church, how politics is not, how politics should not be the concern of the Christian. Now, real quick, what he's not talking about, I think the proper definition of politics, i.e., creation of policy. What he's talking about in particular is election posturing. You know, he's talking about party loyalty. He's talking about what candidate and which candidate is better than who, and blah 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 blah. And he's talking about how we need to keep the state out of the church. So I think probably what set him off is this newfangled King James version of the Bible that Donald Trump is pushing, with lyrics to a song, and with the Constitution, and with some of the other beautiful documents involved in America's founding. But this is he's done with this. He calls it blasphemous. He does not want politics in his church. He says a few things that I'm going to share with you. I'll include a link in this video to a couple of different places where I saw talks on this, and you can see for yourself. It's nothing, in fairness, it's nothing that you haven't said here. It's nothing that you haven't shared with me on this channel. It's nothing that we haven't talked about before. But it is bold, given his congregation, because if you go back and look at some of his other talks, some of the other talks that he's offered, his other sermons, and they're available on YouTube. He's not the person that you might think would come out and say enough is enough with the political nonsense. He's not the type of person that you might think that, okay, well, this is a blasphemous edition of the Bible. He's actually quite conservative. So this isn't some leftist wild and crazy leftist pastor, progressive pastor that's saying this stuff. He's not me. As a matter of fact, if he were watching my channel, my guess would be he'd have a lot of things to say about some of the things that I've said, and I suspect he would be challenging me on many of my stances on the topics that we've addressed. So it's kind of cool that this very conservative Southern gentleman, Southern pastor, is saying some of these things, and again, I think really quite bold, given his context and given his stance on some other issues that I was able to watch him speak about. So again, his name is Lauren Livingston, Central Church of God in Charlotte, North Carolina. One of the things he says, you think that politics is spiritual stuff. You bring in politics into the church. You think politics is spiritual stuff. Politics is of this world. Politics is this party politics that you're doing, this election politics that you're bringing in here. This is not spiritual stuff. Voting is not a spiritual thing, right? He says this stuff is of this world. It's worldly stuff. This is worldly. These are worldly matters. This is not spiritual. He goes on to say, you say you have a duty to vote, and he says, as a Christian, you only have a duty to serve your Lord Jesus Christ. I think this is huge. I think this is lovely and wonderful, and I agree with him on this. He goes on to say, as he's talking, and he's talking about this God Bless America Bible. he says something along the lines of, I'm going to tell you something. The gospel is not an American gospel. And he's right on that too. Gospel's not a Canadian Bible. The gospel's not a Canadian gospel. Gospel's not an American gospel. Gospel's not an English or French gospel. Gospel's doesn't belong to any nation. Never has. No empire. Never has. Gospel doesn't belong to any language, any culture, any society, any community. Never has. Never will. Gospel doesn't belong to a particular person in a particular place at a particular time. But it is for everyone, everywhere, all at once. It belongs to us all, no matter where we are, no matter when we are. It belongs to us all. It can be applied to us, no matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter when we are. But it doesn't belong to any of us. It doesn't belong to any person or group or nationality or language or culture. It's universal. And it transcends human understanding of space and time. Finally, and this is the thing I want to talk about most. Again, he warns his congregation. He says, I'm going to tell you something. This world is not my home. He's saying, you're all worried about these political things. You're all worried about this election. You're all worried about these candidates. You're all worried about this and that and the other thing. He said, this world is not my home. I'm only visiting. I'm just passing through. He's right again. We are just passing through. This world is not our home. Christian, this world is not your home. This is your workplace. This is where we have been placed to serve. And when our time of service is ended, we go home. But between this moment and that, we are here to serve. He goes on, he says, I'm like the 70. I'm like the 70 that Jesus sent out. You're like the 70 that Jesus sent out. We have a mission, and we've got to live that mission. We've got to go out, and we've got to preach the gospel. And we've got to go out, and we've got to heal. And we've got to go out, and we've got to cast out the demons. And we got to go out, and we got to feed the poor. We got to take care of people. We got to take care of our neighbors. Who's our neighbor? Everyone's our neighbor. And we got to take care of their needs. Any conditions to that? Absolutely no conditions. Now, I'm adding this part on. This isn't what he said, but this was a lovely call for his congregation to let go of the earthly concerns and embrace the spiritual ones. This world is not our home. This gospel is not for our nation, for our people. This political stuff, this election stuff, this is not spiritual stuff. This is worldly stuff. And we've got to focus on the spiritual, because our only duty is to Jesus Christ. Our only duty is to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and body, and love our neighbors as ourselves. This is what we're called to do. Now, you may be saying, but Ed, shouldn't we speak up about injustice? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Shouldn't we speak up about providing for the people around us? Yes, we should. We should be speaking up, and we should be encouraging our nations to do that very thing. And what about war and strife and our neighbors and of all other nationalities? Shouldn't we be trying to help them? Yes, for sure. Even though this world isn't our home? Yes, absolutely. What about the environment? Even though this world isn't our home, should we worry about climate change? Yes. Because our neighbors are also the next generation. Our neighbors are the generations that haven't been born yet. And we have a responsibility to take care of them as well. We have a responsibility to serve them. Again, the gospel transcends time and space, and therefore our service must also transcend time or space. But bringing politics and our favorite candidate into the church. Nope. Trying to convince the person sitting next to us in a pew who they should vote for. Nope. And we should definitely not be offering our allegiance to any one candidate, any party. He says, you don't have a duty to vote. He says you have a civic privilege. And with discerning minds, we should exercise that privilege. But we don't bring it into the church. We don't bring the Constitution or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms into the text of the Bible. We don't confuse them. We don't bring the worldly into the spiritual. I remember as a kid, I don't know if anybody else saw these commercials, or maybe it was just a Canadian thing, the Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. It's a type of chocolate bar, and there was a commercial. These two people would always be walking, and one person would be eating a chocolate bar, like a piece of chocolate. Another person would be eating peanut butter. And they would always, they'd come around a corner and they'd bump into each other. And you got your peanut butter and my chocolate, and you got your chocolate and my peanut butter. And they would both taste the result. Oh my gosh, this changes everything. It's a life changer. It's the greatest thing ever. It was Reese's trying to sell their product. That ain't the church in politics. It's not that the two can't mix, it's that they shouldn't. When you bring the worldly into the spiritual loses every time. Worldly concerns are urgent. And urgent always gets its way. Anyway, I would encourage you to take a look at this video. Many of you have asked me, how come more religious leaders aren't speaking out? Well, here's a religious leader speaking out. Here's a conservative religious leader speaking out. Praise be to God. And thank you very much, Pastor Livingston, for being bold and courageous. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that we will give ourselves to the spiritual, that we will live this life as servants for all those around us, taking care of their needs, feeding them, clothing them, providing them shelter and safety. I pray that we would be agents of justice and mercy and compassion and empathy. And I pray that we would receive those beautiful spiritual rewards to help us to continue to do this work until we are called to our true heavenly home. Amen. Nemultus.